The United Kingdom is collapsing. In just 6 years, it changed 5 prime ministers. The British pound fell to its lowest level against the dollar since 1985. The economy is sliding into a recession and will face its longest ever recession. The standard of living is falling faster than ever. Inflation is at almost 10%, while GDP is barely growing. To top it off, Scotland is on the brink of declaring independence, which will most likely push the Northern Ireland to declare independence, which will also kick out the UK from the top 10 largest economies. A little over 100 years ago, the United Kingdom stretched from New Zealand across entire India, the Middle East and Africa, all the way to Canada. It was the only empire in history upon which the sun never sets. In 1929, at the empire's peak, the British ruled around a quarter of the land on Earth. The British pound was the global default currency, and the British economy was booming. London was both the political and the financial capital of the world, and had the world's largest companies, such as East India, which was so big that it had its own military that consisted of over 200,000 professional soldiers. However, in less than 100 years, the United Kingdom lost over 90% of its territories, the British pound is consistently losing its value, and the economy is not even in the top 5 largest economies in the world. In fact, its former colony, India, has overthrown the UK and became the world's 5th largest economy by GDP. If the UK continues the way they are today, in less than 10 years, there might no longer be the UK. All that is left will be just England. I think even London at this point will declare independence. The Bank of England is desperate to lower the rates to at least stop the economy from sliding into a recession. But the highest inflation in decades has pushed the Bank of England to raise the rates to 3.5%, the highest rates in 14 years. When interest rates rise, it becomes more expensive to borrow, which means companies will start borrowing less, which means lower wages, cutting jobs, and even canceling long-term projects that won't bring enough cash in the foreseeable future. The priority will be to cut expenses and get cash on the table. The drop in purchasing power is expected to be so severe that it will wipe out the past 8 years of growth, as wage rises fail to keep pace with inflation and interest rates rise. 8 years of growth is about to disappear in a glimpse of an eye, as if you didn't make any progress in the last 8 years. When the economy is collapsing, the first thing you should do is make it easier to do business. The moment people realize that it's much more affordable and easier to do business in your country, they'll pack their stuff and move to your country. That's why all these tax havens exist. Nobody wants to pay taxes. Ireland reduced its corporate tax to 12.5%, and the next day literally everyone opened their headquarters there. Ireland's GDP per capita is now twice the amount of the United Kingdom. Dubai lowered its taxes and built the infrastructure for businesses. In less than 30 years, it built a city that attracts the wealthiest people across the globe. But guess what the United Kingdom is doing? It is doing the absolute opposite. It's raising taxes because things have become so bad that the government can't even fulfill its budget. Raising taxes should be the last thing you ever want to do at this point. Higher corporate taxes are going to drive out corporations. They will start leaving, which means fewer jobs will be available, which means higher unemployment, which means fewer people paying taxes. That's not all. Corporations aren't just going to take all that burden up on themselves. They will find ways to avoid those taxes by relocating their headquarters or some other financial schemes. But eventually, they will pass that cost burden to the customers. So if you have raised taxes to fix inflation, congrats, you've pushed inflation to rise.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
The government might make some money now, but eventually in the long run, it's losing money. I'm not saying taxes are bad, there should be taxes, but when you raise taxes when people are making money, when you build an environment where businesses want to come and invest. But now, when the entire world is in a recession, you should at least not raise taxes. But that shows how desperate is the British government. It is left with no other choice but to squeeze more out of people who are still making some money. The government has become so big, so incompetent, so ineffective that it can't cut funds out of some projects to relocate them to other projects. That tells us a lot about how bad the situation is. But that's not all. Listen to this. The crisis is also set to push home prices to decline as much as 9% by next year. That's half the price drop as we saw in 2008. The problem with deflation is that it has a compound effect. People don't immediately jump to buy when home prices start declining. They keep waiting, expecting prices to reach the bottom before buying. When you see a stock falling, you don't buy it because you want to wait till it hits the rock bottom to maximize your profit. So is the case with everything else. The 9% decline can cripple the demand to the point where that fall in prices would double or even triple, causing another housing crash in the next year or two, worsening the already crippled economy of the Great Britain. In the 2000s, the average home price was slightly over £93,000, while the average salary was almost like £19,000. Fast forward to 2022, home prices rose by 300%, while the average wage was increased to just £26,000. That's not even a 50% increase. Buying a house has never been so expensive for the average Brit. The housing market in the UK has turned into one giant bubble that can burst at any moment, bringing the rest of the economy down to its knees, and the current crisis can easily push that bubble to finally burst. What's happening now is just a taste of what could potentially happen in the coming future. It can wipe out the life savings of so many people, especially people who took mortgages and will witness the value of their homes plummet right in front of their eyes. Combine that with rising fuel and food costs and you get a perfect recipe for economic turmoil. It's not surprising that Scotland wants to leave the UK. Britain left the EU with a tiny margin of 51.9%. That was such a shocking news back then that the Prime Minister David Cameron resigned. Since without the EU, Britain has very little hope to grow in the 21st century alone. Britain is no longer the empire that rules the world. That role has shifted to its former colony, the US. However, over 62% of Scots voted to remain in the EU. So while the UK is going through such a crisis after leaving the EU, Scotland is wondering why on earth it has to suffer the same fate as England if it had chosen to remain in the European Union. Britain is not going to let the Scotland live easily. It has passed laws that would make it difficult for another referendum to take place. But you see where it's going. The crisis that Britain is undergoing didn't emerge yesterday. It's a combination of multiple crises that have been accumulating over decades. Brexit alone created political turmoil that Britain hasn't fixed yet, and it's only getting worse. Combine that with the crises the pandemic had created since 2020 and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, you get UK's worst economic crisis since World War II.